everyone. Welcome. And as you can see from the title, this is the topic of leadership in uncertain times, developing resilience. And our presenter is Canadian Major General David Fraser, who is now retired, but very, very active. And I have, on behalf of the Bonar Institute for Purposeful Leadership, asked David Fraser to introduce himself today. And I would like to note that David will review some slides in a presentation, and then we're going to move into a discussion. Everyone in the audience is automatically muted. You do have the ability to unmute yourself when we get to the discussion point. And David, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself. And I want to, on behalf of the Bonar Institute for Purposeful Leadership, thank you very much for making the effort to speak with us and our audience this evening. I'm absolutely delighted. I always learn something from you, and I'm always excited when I have the opportunity to learn from you. So thank you very much. I'm going to go on mute now and give you my attention.
Well, John, thank you very much for really a very kind introduction. And James, that's great to be able to kick off the Bonar Institute webinar series. And ladies and gentlemen, I really want to just kind of prime the pump so that we can get into a discussion here today. And if not, give you some ideas to think about and circle back and talk about. Because what we are talking about and what is passionate for me is about leadership. And I come from this as a student of leadership over 40 years. I spent 30 years in the Army, the Canadian Army. I was an operator. So most of my time was spent in units and serving abroad. I have served with many nations. Very proud of my service with the United States, with the U.S. Northern Command. I'm a plank holder for the 1st Combatant Command for Homeland Defense. Our first operation there was actually support to the Olympics on the West Coast many years ago. And then I served in Afghanistan as part of 10th Mountain Division as one of their brigade commanders. So I did, 30 years. I've commanded Army doctrine and training and running contingency operations. And then about 10 years ago, I got out of the forces because it's really a young person's sport, and I really wanted to let other people take the mantle, and I wanted to try my hand at the private sector. So I stand before you today more as a hybrid leader of both private and public sector, and I've started up companies, I've run manufacturing companies, I work in a financial institution today. I have written a book, and much of what I'm going to talk about tonight is in my second book called The Anticipant Organization. And really, I just want to share with you some of the observations I have about leadership in what I would call some of the most uncertain times that we have seen in history, and all of us are actually living through it. Everyone talks about, we live in unsettled times, beware of the Chinese curse. I mean, those are platitudes, but I think really what we are going through is unprecedented. And it's much like the climate change in the slide. It's turbulent, it's unpredictable, it's never ending, but none of us are alone, and we have to work together to see us through this storm. And I want to talk about weather in a sort of a paradigm point of view. So for the last 2 years, all of us have lived under the umbrella of COVID. We have found probably around the 17th of March 2 years ago, most of us shut down in many ways. Businesses closed and sent people home. Universities closed and sent students home. Public schools closed and sent students home. Parents who then had to work also had to school their children. We went through uncertainty of this thing called the COVID virus. And then we went through all sorts of machinations about inoculations, vaccinations, masks, we essentially turned off our economy for the better part of 2 years. In addition to turning off our economy, the pressures on people are incalculable in the sense that many people lost lives, lost loved ones, lost employment. We now have things in terms like COVID babies who have never socialized with other people. We have, in many cases, 30% of the workforce, which has never met each other and has been working from home and is now being told to go back to work. And if we thought turning off the economy was hard, and it has absolutely huge ramifications, turning on the economy seems to be even harder. And I will say that from my own experience of talking to some of my brethren on the educational institutions, including the military, trying to turn on a university or a military training system is turning out to be one of the hardest things they've ever done. It's probably as complex as running a space shuttle, even though it didn't seem to be that way. But this is what we lived for the past 2 years. And in this past summer, the summer that we're in right now, we thought we had turned the corner and we were actually coming out of the great freeze and coming out of the great isolation with all that we had to deal with coming out. And then we got hit. We got hit with another wave, and not just a small wave, but a tsunami wave that is still hitting us on the head. It's inflation. Inflation is running at least 8 to 9%, depending on where you are. What economists thought was going to be a short-term issue is now being predicted to be somewhere between 3 and 5 years before it gets back to 2%. The economy itself is struggling tremendously for a number of different factors. We have the Great Resignation, and I'm going to talk about that because there are aspects of that that are affecting us, and I'll mention that, but there's another wave that's going to hit us, and I'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. $3 trillion has disappeared from the stock market. So all those people who were thinking about retiring can't. 40% of Canadians say that if the interest rates go up, they will have to sell their house. Even a greater number of Canadians are talking about delaying retiring because of what inflation and what's about to happen in the economy. The cryptocurrency, a great disruptor in society, has lost over $1 trillion, and it's still in a free fall, and what's going to happen with that. Then we have a human worker shortage where there's at least 11 million jobs in the US that are looking for people they can't find. Where have these people gone? Where have the leaders gone who are now checking out at all levels and not coming back because they're saying they've had enough and they want to go home? The stressors on workers, on families, and on leaders, both at families and at work, cannot be overstated. And we're going to talk about that, and let's unpack that. And I unpack that from an idea of uncertainty, and uncertainty, which was my main world in the military. And how do we deal with uncertainty, not for something that's happened for 2 years, but is persistent? And this is what we want to talk about, a resiliency in leadership. So I want to talk about changing the paradigm here a bit and saying, we're not talking about winning anymore. We're talking about how do we survive? How do we survive each day? How do we survive as family members, as individuals, as people in companies? And how do you lead in this environment that is completely turned upside down? We are reacting. And the question is, how do we get ahead? And I'm going to talk about changing the paradigm from reacting to anticipating. And what about uncertainty? How do we get back to the new normal? Well, I don't believe there is such a thing as a new normal. This is the norm today. It is completely uncertain, and we are in what we are going to face for the next many, many years. And how do we lead in that type of environment? And how do we work in that type of environment? The other thing that is happening, and I've seen it in my own career, is time compression is exponential and not slowing down. And that time compression is now forcing us to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We never turn off. Those iPhones and iPads and computers and Wi-Fi are forcing us to work. And COVID made it even worse because we didn't have to travel anymore. We could walk from our bedrooms to our dining room, sit down, grab our coffee, and we could work from 8 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock at night. And now we're trying to go back to the office. And I will tell you myself, when I had to go back to the office, I had to think because I had travel time now. And those were hours that I would have put into productivity. But now I actually had to move somewhere and I was relearning how to do the old way of doing business. And how do businesses who want both out of you manage to deal with that? So time compression is one of the greatest things, and that's a function of technology. It's not going away, it's actually accelerating. So the question is there a pattern to this absolute chaotic system and chaotic situation that we can unpack and try to figure out so that we can survive? And how do you develop a resiliency during this? Because it's not a sprint, it is a marathon. And I look at the executives in business today, and I sit on a number of boards and I work in a bunch of private companies. They're all exhausted. But the work that they have done for the last 2 years will be nothing compared to the challenges they have ahead. And we're going to talk about that. And I want to show you some ideas of how to work through this on vagaries and uncertainty, how to lead through it, how to develop what you can do to actually survive and get through the next 3 to 5 years. And here's the key. If you remember nothing else tonight, remember this. It's all about balance. And it's about the three-legged stool. And it's about your family, it's about you, and it's about work. And you can do and stand on one leg for a while, and you're going to fall over when you get tired. You can stand on 2 legs for a while, but over time, you're going to fall down. So you got to start with yourself, your physical well-being and your mental well-being, and you got to build time to do that. Then you actually have to build time for your family. And you got to have time for the kids. You got to have time for that dog that's running around and barking, or when something happens or your partner wants to go out, you got to build in time, because families are actually forever, and they are one of the greatest stress reductions, and one of the greatest things that we can do to help with resiliency is by having a strong family. You forsake on that, you are actually hollowing yourself out on being resilient. And the other thing is on work, the paradigm in work has changed. It is not business as usual. It is now, what is the new paradigm? And that is dependent on where you find yourself, and we can talk about that later. But simplistically, as the bottom line up front, this is about balance of those three constructs if you want to be resilient to deal with the next 3 to 5 years, even though you're tired. And where are we going through for the next 3 to 5 years? We are on a 30-year cycle, and this is what the world is looking like right now on the right-hand side of the slide. But you can see where we've had great peaks and then valleys that happened afterwards. We are about entering into a flat period where it could be stagflation or it could be recession, very much akin to the 1970s, with an awful lot more factors than the 1970s ever went through. But this is not new. So when we look at history and if we look at the economics, there are tidbits of information out there that we can actually pull forward to study to help us mitigate the uncertainty that we're going to go through. But this graph, which I think is very important because this is going to drive the economy and much of what we're dealing with in whatever business you're in, you're going to find yourself on this graph somewhere. So let me just step back for a second here and put that graph into comparison by saying we've had major technological shifts, and we are right in the midst of the digital shift. But what is different from the digital shift from the ones before? For the very first time, ladies and gentlemen, we humans are not invited to the party. In the digital shift, because of technology, machines are now operating at speeds faster than we can ever operate at, in a degree of precision better than humans can do. And now with artificial intelligence, which is, from a life cycle point of view, is like my 3-year-old child was, growing quickly, but they are now talking to each other. And the question is, how do we as leaders, where before we were physically involved in each of the pivots, how do we now lead in a pivot where it is machines talking and providing services to us? There are machines today in my financial institution that provide services that actually have a name. There are machines today that are actually monitoring human behavior and actually correcting and measuring our abilities. Machines are no longer devices. Machines are now becoming colleagues. So how do you lead this new type of colleague? I used to have to go and talk to people that didn't normally want to talk to another human being, and they're called code writers. These people wrote code. And now we have to talk to code writers. And most code writers, quite frankly, in the world look like me. They're white Anglo-Saxon men, and many of them are living in California. There's an inherent bias. There is an inherent problem with white Anglo-Saxon men writing code. They don't represent diversity. So all the things that we're working on with diversity in companies has to be embedded in our code. And every year that we do our ethical training with whatever company, we have to ensure that our software is doing the same ethical training, and we have to talk to coders and lead coders as much in order to lead machines. So leadership is still about leading people, and we can't forget that because the environment is changing so rapidly. So this is one of the key things that is coming out of COVID, because the digital agenda has accelerated because of COVID and our ability now to do things electronically and digitally, which means machines are actually working faster, and we have to lead machines now in addition to people. So what does that mean? Well, simplistically is now you're going to be faced with not just a normal crisis, you're going to have to find yourself dealing with a new type of crisis. And we've coined this in my next book called The Anticipant Organization is a nano crisis. And a nano crisis is something that happens in a machine. And this is very much what happened in 2008 when the stock market crashed, because what people actually did to stop the crash was they unplugged the machines. They unplugged the machines because things were happening in code, which nobody could understand because it was at a speed and a domain that we are not part of. We need to start creating new leadership techniques and how to handle a nano crisis, and most simply, how to handle a crisis that happens rapidly. Example, COVID. COVID is a slow-moving nano crisis. If you want to think about it, COVID, we saw it coming around the world. We saw it open up in China. We saw it come to the United States. And it was in a matter of time where it spread through the States and Canada and the rest of the world. And that was a slow-moving virus and crisis. We can actually have, and that COVID was something that happened in our body, but COVID could actually happen in a computer. And how are we going to deal with that type of virus and that type of crisis as leaders? And as time goes on, our time to make decisions is getting rapidly reduced. When I was an officer in Bosnia in the 1990s, I had days and weeks to make decisions. When I was in Afghanistan, fast forward, I had 3 to 5 minutes to make decisions. I told my people we need to make a life choice decision in a minute. Now it's 2022, and now we are having to make decisions in seconds, if not nanoseconds. And this is something you cannot change and you cannot react to it. You're going to have to anticipate it. And why are you going to have to do that? Because the world has changed. The world looks very much like on the right-hand side, but we're organized very much like on the left-hand side of this slide. So organizations which are set up like on the left-hand side are dealing with situations that are happening on the right-hand side in networks, and things are happening at speed. So our whole idea about leadership and what's changing because of COVID, which is slow moving, and what's happening with the economy, the question is, how do we lead in all of this, and what are we going to do? And I'm going to walk through a couple of things. So here's the next thing. The second bullet point you want to take away from this presentation tonight. So the first one is balance the three-legged stool. The next one is you must become an anticipant. We can no longer be participating. We must anticipate. And so the simple question I ask my intelligence and any of my team, including my private sector people, is who is responding to whom? If we are responding to our competition, if we are responding to the enemy, i.e. the Ukrainians to the Russians or the Russians to the Ukrainians, you are losing. If they are responding to you, you are winning. And if you are winning, go faster, put more resources on it. Go so fast that your competition completely collapses. So simplistically, we've got to go from reacting to anticipating. If we don't do that, we will not survive. And this is a story about survival. And if we don't survive, what happens next? So how does that idea of anticipating translate into the principles of leadership here? They don't change. The principles of leadership are still the same. John and I were talking earlier today about the principles of leadership, and you can find different ones. Being an Army guy, I kind of go back to what the Army is all about, but it's all about leading people. It's about getting people to do what you want them to do, the art of leadership. It's not a science, it's an art. And in the military, the only difference is you put a comma when they don't want to do it. Because in my world, I actually have to put my people at risk of losing their lives. And so it's not a normal human thing to go and charge a Russian machine gun post. But if you have got proper leadership, if you have communicated with them, established trust, professional competency, you're mitigating the risk, and they will do it because they understand and trust you. The same is today. But we now need to talk to programmers so that all these things that are here on this slide are embedded in our programs. Diversity is embedded in the program. The ethics, the ethos is embedded in the program. Because if it's not embedded in the program, we will have problems, and we will get not the desired effects, we will get an effect we don't want. So this is becoming exceptionally important. And therefore, to be an anticipant is very much of what is shown on here. And what I want to talk about is we have to be an anticipant. And let me give you an example. We have just gone through the Great Resignation, where we are looking for people, and many companies are reacting to the loss of people and searching for people to run their businesses. If you are an anticipant, you will actually start to figure out how to cut costs while your businesses are losing purchase orders, so that you can survive the storm to get to the other side. But you cannot do this by reacting. You're going to have to do this by anticipating. And the other thing that is, companies that will survive are the ones that will be ready for the great correction, which is about to happen. We all know that something, when I go back to that slide, if you can think back to the 30-year slide, we're going back into either stagflation, recession, something. added on top of the great resignation, added on top of coming out of COVID, added on top of it, the social problems. So who are the leaders that are going to anticipate, get ready for the great correction, and actually come out as survivors? And I'm not talking about the disruptors like Musk or Apple. I'm talking about even a different type of leader that will actually survive and see the opportunities that can actually help their people survive. And not, this isn't about women. It's all about, how do I survive as an individual? How do I survive as a leader of a company to take care of my employees, to take care of my shareholders, to take care of my clients? And so the question that we all should be asking is, what's next, and how do we get through it, and how do we deal with it? It's going to take an awful lot of trust. And this trust is going to be predicated on communications. We have to communicate, and especially in times of distress, in times of uncertainty, we must communicate even more so than ever before. And it starts with the boss at the top, and it keeps on going down, and it's interactive. It is, you got to actively listen. You've got to empower your people in order to survive. And I have done a jump like this, and let me tell you, if I didn't trust the pilot, I wouldn't have gone out of the airplane. And how he made sure and instilled the trust, you were attached to 4 points on that person's body. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, you get close to that body. And on those 4 points, he made sure that you feel that you were hooked up 4 times before you walk out of the airplane. And the last thing he does, he probably puts his hand around your head, pulls it back, and you know you're walking out. And then you go for the ride of your life. But it's all based on trust. And it's, the trust was a function of how much we communicated with each other before we got onto that situation. And this is what leaders have to do. When you are in uncertain circumstances like we are right now, this picture really illustrates for me what leadership is about, and what trust and what communication, what we need to do, because the next 3 to 5 years are going to be harder than the last 2 years that we've just gone through. So how do we get and do this? So here's the roadmap of how do we achieve what I've been talking about for some time. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes on this and just walk through it, and maybe we can talk about it. I said at the beginning, you start with yourself. You got to identify your strengths and weaknesses. You got to make the assessment, and you got to admit honestly to yourself, what are you good at? What are you not good at? And then you follow the anticipant principles, which I can give you later, but we've listed a whole bunch of principles of how to be an anticipant. And then you go through another analysis about the anticipant, about applying those principles, adapting yourself and your organization. And then you've got to take and control your data in your company. Because remember, most people are overwhelmed with information and data. If you can use machines, you can empower yourself to make better informed decisions. It happens all the time. And going into the next 3 to 5 years, the more that we can get data and analyze what's happened in the past, it reduces the risk so we understand what we're looking at in front of us. It won't be exact, but then we can actually do that. Once you have done those 3 steps, then you've got to build your team. And you got to find people. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in Afghanistan, I was getting an intelligence briefing every morning. And, you know, it was the bog standard. At this time, this happened. At that time, that happened. It was just a list of data points and nothing. And I was asking, so what? So I looked around the room and I saw this officer squirming. And I said, you, what are you thinking about? And tell me. And this junior officer stood up and told me a story of what the bad guy was thinking and what he thought he was going to be doing. And I said, you give my presentations every morning now, and ladies and gentlemen, listen to this. This person understands what we need to hear. So look at your organization, and don't look at the merit list, but look at your organization, those people who can think ahead, who are not just following process, but who can anticipate, empower them, give them the authority to make and do things. Give them the information requirements that you want by time. If someone dies, I need to be woken up right away. All right. If we've got, you know, financials, I want to hear once a month on every quarter. but list out your information requirements and give the people the authority to act and not react and go back to you and ask for permission. Then reorganize your organization, remap it based on this, based on the new environment that we're facing. It may still look like a hierarchy, but maybe it's a little bit more like a Gumby doll where it's more flexible. You still need that hierarchy for administration and for all sorts of stuff and to pass information. But when you have a crisis, squish it. Again, another war story. I ran an organization of 12,000 people. And on the radio one day, I heard about a sergeant who was in trouble and he was getting attacked by a whole bunch of bad guys. I got on the radio and I was at the top talking to the sergeant at the bottom, and I said, "What do you need?" He said, "I need ammunition." And everybody was listening. I said, "Okay, you're my number one priority. All the ammunition goes to you. Medevac goes to you. We're going to send in a resupply. I'm going to put airplanes above you." And meanwhile, my staff's learning this, and they're now stacking stuff up based on what I'm talking to the sergeant. So the whole organization collapsed on the crisis. At the end, the sergeant was fine. We went back to our normal 20,000, 12,000 people, depending on the day, but we reorganized the organization based on the situation and the crisis. It works. Then you have to rehearse these nano crises, and the more that you rehearse, the better you're going to become, because what rehearsing is a mental exercise of how to survive, so that when you do get hit with the unknown, you're actually aware to adapt and to excel and to survive. So this roadmap is essentially how to become resilient, how to become a better leader, and how to include your entire team and get them to have ownership of all of it, so you become one. And if there's anything we talked about coming out of this COVID, it's about the worker is they want to be part of the solution. They just don't want to be excluded the way things work. So how do you do this? Well, you're going to have to do in the military what we say, a rehearsal of concept. So once you've done this, your homework assignment, you have to rehearse it. So you have to go through this checklist. You go through a couple of scenarios, and they don't have to be hard ones. So in whatever business you're in, you create some scenarios from the worst case to the most likely case scenarios, and you walk through each scenario and you replicate the environment. You assign somebody to be the leader, you assign a referee, you assign some umpires, you assign some competition, and then you actually go through and you run it through like a chess game until the point where you actually break each other. And by breaking each other, then you know the stressors and where it's going to be. You go back, write the plan, and you keep reviewing it so that people understand if this happens, if that happens, they know what to do. And they shouldn't have to come back to you and ask for permission. Empower them and give them the authority. If businesses rehearse this, in many cases, businesses would make as many mistakes because they don't rehearse it. They come up with a good idea, but they don't practice it. So when they do execute it, it does actually have some flaws in it. So how do you know if you're doing well or not doing well in this new game of survival? Well, what you're going to have to do is take a look at your organization before and your organization after this exercise. And I've just put on a slide here of some things of what an anticipatory organization looks like versus a typical organization. And it's not perfect, but if you know where you are, you can at least anticipate and react to some of those things that are about to happen to you. So again, this is another little checklist about how your organization and your leadership can work through some of the challenges you might have. So let's start wrapping up the discussion here with some sort of takeaway of what are the new rules that we are now facing over the next 3 to 5 years and actually have been changing coming out of COVID. We still have to act with conviction, because the conviction of a leader will be instrumental to the support and the trust and the confidence of the team underneath that leader. If the leader is unsure, the team will not succeed. You have to build and test your processes, and those processes must be adaptive to what is and not what was. And the other thing I want to say is I want to jump to flattening in a crisis. We talked about that. I call it the Gumby effect. Flexibility. If you're not flexible in a crisis, a nano crisis, you won't survive. You'll get bypassed. And there are many examples of companies. Look at Kodak. Kodak could not handle the digitized world, and as a result, they became a dinosaur. And go for good enough. Don't go for perfection. What is good enough? Perfection is the enemy of good enough. And allow your people just to give you the 60% solution on time versus 100% solution late. And I want to go through some of the other stuff. And rehearsing, I can't emphasize enough about rehearsing situations. You have to, more so than ever today, and everyone's talking about culture. You got to make sure the culture in your company, which is how you do things, will actually address the performance of your company, of what you do. And if you culturally are not attuned to the new society, you're not going to be able to generate the effects you're looking for. So you're going to have to reprogram your organization based on your culture and what is necessary to meet the needs of your clients and the conditions. And ladies and gentlemen, this comes down right back to the same thing, which is you got to know your people. And I would put a comma there, and your machines. If you know your people and your machines, you will be able to anticipate when they are performing well and when they actually need a hug and when they maybe need a bit of a nudge, because we no longer have normalcy. What we have is what it is. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are in a unique situation that things are changing so rapidly that what we've been doing before worked. It is working, but we need more tools in the toolbox to manage what we just come out of and what we are about to go through for the next 3 to 5 years. And if some of the things that I've given you can help you create some of those tools or sharpen up some of the other tools, maybe it will help all of us and help you to survive the storm that's about to come. So John, with that, I'm just going to stop there and open up the floor to some questions. Over.
Well, I definitely have some questions, and I thought of many during your presentation, and I'm sure people in the audience will as well. One question I have, taking it down to a very practical level. So I like that slide where you showed the traditional organization chart, the origins of which I would argue go back to corporate governance standards established in the 1600s by the Dutch East India Company and imported by the English into the United States and Canada. And with fiduciary duties, it made me think. And then we see that other side, yes, this slide, with what you would call a more flattened organization. And what the question that immediately comes to my mind, having been in organizations, I've seen exercises such as, well, let's let the strategy department think about it, and then it will be selectively communicated to the CEO, the C-level executives, and maybe VPs. And then there might be marketing involved, our internal communications, shareholder communications. The message gets very diluted. So the question I have, and then of course there's the board. Does the board communicate effectively with the organization? So just from a practical standpoint, maybe you can have, I can certainly see how teams, individual leaders and teams of leaders can become anticipatory, but how do you make your entire organization anticipatory rather than having anticipation silos in the or turn anticipation silos into participation. Anticipation and participation. I hope you get my the nuances I'm trying to communicate.
No, absolutely, John. And let me just, there's an awful lot there I want to talk about.
Yes.
So let's just talk about the simple one. The organization on the left, what typically happens in most organizations is a centralization of power that goes up to the top. They suck an awful lot of authorities up to the top and push down the responsibilities down to the bottom. Mm-hmm. So for control, it's very easy for the head to you know, and simplistically, let's look at the Prime Minister's office in Canada, where the PMO almost exercise absolute rule over ministries and whatnot, because they want to control the message and whatnot. It's understandable, because everything that, you know, ministries do has an impact back on the PM. So, you know, and I've seen organizations that, you know, even the one that I was in defense, centralizes an awful lot of power in the head because they want to know what's going on. Mm-hmm. Which kind of, you know, nullifies those associates at the bottom. And what you need to do in many ways in the military, it's what we call mission command. So instead of, you know, transactional, you do this, this, and this, and this, what you say, and this takes an awful lot of trust and confidence of the leader themselves, is this is what I want you to do and why I want you to do it. How is your problem? All right. And as long as you achieve this effect, this is the effect I want you to achieve, why I want you to achieve it, here are the resources, now you go figure it out. Mission command. So you've given the authority to your associates at the bottom. You've given them the clear direction that they need, organizational alignment so they know where they're working in, and let them get on with it. That will allow this standard organization to operate more efficiently and more like a team of teams than like a team in a metaphor. And given the scenario and the situation I described earlier about technology and the speed, we have to do this because it's organizations that do push down the authorities that will allow and become much better at what they need to do. The other thing that we do in the military is we'll take an organization like this and we create what we call is a task force. So it may be the CEO, a vice president, a director, and a manager or an associate, and we create a sub-team to manage a certain problem or crisis. And so you can do that so to make it more agile and adaptive and effective in time-sensitive issues. That's another way of doing it. But the reality is the disruptors out there are going to force us to change and somehow modify our organizations. You can't go from the left right to the right. What you can do, though, is by authorities and by information and by organizational alignment, push down and allow your organizations to be more agile and allowing people to make better decisions based on what you want to do. The other thing I would say on the board, this is where boards today can take on a more leadership role by being more strategic. And it's the theory, right? Boards are either management board or the strategic board. I'm talking about strategic, where they have to anticipate and look ahead and, you know, empower the management teams to deal with what, don't tell me what you're doing now. Tell me what you're going to do next year and the next 2 or 3 years, and get the management teams thinking ahead. So this is a new leadership opportunity for boards to help out management teams who are just drowning under the uncertainty of today, to pick up the mantle and help the management teams think about tomorrow and the next 5 years. So you can, you know, the boards can take a lot of the burden off and help guide the management teams over the next 3 to 5 years. So there's great opportunities for all these organizations to survive, but this means communication and working together.
So I'm curious, that everything you've said makes a lot of sense, and it reminds me of the management consultant Peter Drucker, who wrote so much about innovation and anticipated the need for organizations to be flat. He talked about it in the context of knowledge workers who possessed the capital of the company and needed autonomy to move the company forward. So a question that arises for me, suppose you have the board, the CEOs, VPs and directors, and they've been operating very successfully under a model that is not so anticipatory. What are the personal attributes? I certainly think about capabilities such as emotional intelligence, leadership capabilities. So if you have an organization that has been successful under models that are not aligned with anticipatory leadership, what if I'm aware I have that an issue? How do I change myself? What do I do as a leader to acquire the skills necessary to be an anticipatory leader? What do I have to do to help my organization change?
Okay, so a couple of things. I would say anticipatory leader is somebody that understands and is more comfortable with risk.
Yes.
So you have to ask yourself, what is your risk tolerance?
Okay.
And not everybody's going to be able to do this.
Yes.
And so when in box D here, build anticipant teams, and there's a whole chapter in the book about anticipant teams. Not everybody can be an anticipant.
Yes.
Some people are participants and are reactive because they follow rules and they just do what they're told.
Yes.
There's nothing wrong with that. But
Yes.
if you want to build out a team or lead the team, you need to find those people who have greater tolerance to risk,
Yes.
have good judgment, have bigger and better EQ, which
Yes.
gives them better balance of understanding people and the situation, vision. So they're looking not just in silos, but they can do cross-silo analysis. And the other thing is visualization, time and space. People who can actually visualize are better at some of the complex problems of uncertainty. And people who cannot visualize have a harder time going through some problem sets and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is people who don't understand time and space will not do well in great uncertainties because they don't understand when they make a decision, the consequence of in time and space of a decision. So I look for people, risk tolerance, time and space, visualization, EQ, and they're very subtle things. And it's not so much about IQ. It's definitely IQ I can measure. I want the other pieces of a humanity that really are the distinguishers of being a good team member and being a good leader that IQ by itself just doesn't give you. The IQ doesn't make you a leader. It's all the other stuff around here that can make you be a leader. And a leader who has greater risk tolerance and has got confidence and that can communicate and provide the encouragement and accept risk themselves will actually probably be able to get more out of their people than doing it themselves. It's T.E. Lawrence. T.E. Lawrence said in 1914, I think about let them do it themselves imperfectly, then us do it perfectly for them. And he was talking about the Arabs. And I think most leaders, great leaders, have always done that. It's okay. If they get it done, I could do it better, but they got it done and 5 of them got it done. That means I couldn't do all 5 things. So the important thing is, are we getting it done? And so again, don't let perfection become your enemy, and don't let winning be the only metric of success. Today, it's about surviving.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So another question. So suppose I'm a leader and I have my team of leaders, and I realize I need to make my organization anticipatory. What would be the role, for example, of one-on-one coaching of leaders and group coaching, perhaps coaching for the entire team Is there a role for training, consulting? Because perhaps I don't have the internal knowledge, resources, and capabilities to make the transformation necessary. What resources would I need to access in order to transform myself and transform my team? How would I encourage that? And so under your thoughts, I would, as a leader, need to set an example by transforming myself to become anticipatory, to encourage others to do so as well.
So I have always had a mentor of some sort myself. You know, I have just gone out and I've been lucky that in the military, I've had senior officers that put their arms around me or kick me in the ass with their size 12 combat boot when I needed it. And, you know, I am here where I am today, and I have a business mentor that has allowed and taught me for the last 10 years about business. I have gone out and looked for that. I have gone on a program in the States called the Capstone program, where they call it the Baby Generalist course, where they take retired, you know, general and flag officers, and they're coaches, mentors, both. And they teach you how to be a senior leader. The other thing they do is an American organization, a military, which I think is the best in the world. They actually have mentors that actually work with commanders like myself on operations. And you know, so you got a 4-star general, and all of a sudden this guy's walking around in the, you know, jeans one day, and he walked up and he said, "Oh, I'm Tommy Franks' mentor." You know, I happen to be a guy named Gary Luck, and you know, Gary Luck in my world is like a godlike figure, the 18th Airborne Corps commander in the first Gulf War. And he went, "Yeah, I just come down here and talk to Tommy, because Tommy's, you know, running a big operation called the Gulf War, and you know, he needs someone to talk to." Well, I'm not in the chain of command, but you know, I talk to Tommy, and you know, we just go through stuff, and I tell him when he's full of, you know what, and I tell him when he's doing some good stuff, and you know, and that helps you as a sounding board, because leadership is a pretty lonely thing. So we call this a battle buddy. If you have a battle buddy in as a leader, you can actually, you know, it helps you deal with some of the stress. It helps you deal with some ideas. And the other thing is having a formalized coaching and mentorship program in your company, either internal or something that's external. I've done both. It's all about developing the potential of your people. So I always used to say to my team, your greatest job is not developing the effect. Your greatest job is actually developing your people to replace you doing your job. And so, you know, my HR worries are less if I can do it from inside, and I still only bring in 10% outside for new blood. But if I can teach you to be a better coach and mentor of our people, and then we bring experts when we need to, then sort of give some fresh blood and whatnot. But you can't do this without coaching and mentoring or having a battle buddy. You are not alone. This is not a lonely endeavor. You have to have other people to provide that, and they have to be. And again, from a chemistry point of view, they have to be people that works with you and can actually identify with what you're doing and bring the skill sets you're looking for. So we have a whole thing called Battle Buddy of coaching and mentoring that's in the book, because you can't do this by yourself.
So suppose many organizations actually do, including the military, U.S. military, you know, and I've mentioned the U.S. Army Field Manual on Leadership and cited it in my research. So suppose I already have a mentoring, training, and leadership development program, internal coaches, external coaches, and I learn about the need for becoming an anticipatory organization. What do I need to do? Do I need to change my coaching, mentoring, training programs? Is there something special in the programs needed for encouraging or transforming the organization to become anticipatory, for people as individuals, for groups of individuals as teams, and the entire organization?
The short answer is no. The longer answer is you have to review what you're doing and ensuring that it does answers 3 questions and 1 principle.
Mhm.
In the military, there's something called, and not in leadership, this is now about staff work and everything we do is concurrent activity, review what you do and have somebody review it before you send it out,
Mhm.
and anticipation of future tasks.
Mhm.
And this is as old as I am. So even way back when, the anticipation of future tasks by its very nature is anticipatory.
Mhm. Mhm.
But let me put it into another context.
Mhm.
Whatever you're talking about, John, ask yourself the question, do your procedures answer the following question? What is, what if, and what next?
Mhm.
If those procedures answers those questions, you will become anticipatory
Mhm.
because you are now dealing with the problem today. You're dealing with all the exigencies and contingencies of what we would call contingency plans, what if problems. And then what we call in the military sequels is what's next.
Mhm.
And what I'm talking about is too many people worry about what is and what was. And I didn't ask what was, because what was doesn't matter other than an after action review. What we really are trying to say is the focal point has to be on what's next.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So
So one,
simplistically, answer those 3 questions.
yes. So
Your
one,
procedures, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. My apologies.
No,
That we
no,
have
no.
latency in the.
I'm a
in the Zoom.
general. I'm a general. Generals they just never shut up.
Oh, I love it. I love it because you have wonderful things to say. So one final question. We certainly are coming to the end of our hour. What is the role of the past? Are there lessons, any lessons from the past that we can draw upon, learn, times of change, times of turmoil, that we can use as guidance? Or is there a set of principles I can use to evaluate my organization's history and past, to use for lessons and guidance to bring my team through into the anticipatory leadership model?
There is nothing wrong with studying the past.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, if you do not study the past, you will be assured of repeating the past.
Mm-hmm.
So on this slide here, there are all sorts of nuggets
Yes.
from the past. If you study this over a 30-year, there's a 30-year cycle.
Yes.
Which gives you a few indicators of what's next.
Mm-hmm.
However, the last time we had anything like COVID, it was called the Spanish flu.
Yes.
So that's new. And then we've got, the inflation, which is kind of akin to what we've been having in the 70s and whatnot. But we also have the digital pivot, which we didn't have before. So you got to look at the past and the lessons learned, and then you add all these other factors. And then you answer the question, then what's next? And if you answer the question, what's next, based on all those factors, you won't repeat the past, but you will actually be in a better position to actually act on the future. And all we're doing is just mentally preparing ourselves, because planning is just going through all the stuff you think is going to happen. When it really does happen, no plan survives first contact. You will adjust, but the more you put into it by studying, the better you will be prepared for that, oh my God, moment that comes in.
Yes, definitely. Well, David, this has been a fascinating presentation. I thank you very much. I wish we had another hour, but we don't. And it's been absolutely delightful. I have a lot to think about. I think everyone has a lot to think about. And I definitely will be getting your book. I've already ordered one of your books for my friends. And thank you again. And at this point, we will sign off. And thank you, everyone.